Welcome to this new episode of Unleashed. Okay, in this episode, we'll celebrate the transformative journey of a technology expert who had mastered the art of delivering cutting-edge technology solutions. Known for his insight into technology trends and an impressive track record in implementing technology solutions, he was standing at a pivotal point in his career. He was very critical for the success of his firm, yet he was not making it to the next level. The firm was not recognizing him to grow into the partnership level of the company. So in spite of his technology prowesses, I think it was important for him at this stage of his career to build bigger perspectives, wider perspectives, strategic perspectives, as well as strong interpersonal skills, ability to build relationships and grow beyond just delivering transactional solutions to building more strategic relationships, both internally and externally. His journey celebrates this transformation, celebrates this stepping out of comfort zone of this leader from just focusing on transactions to deliberately building the bigger perspectives, to deliberately networking and building strong internal and external relationships, and working on his ability to see the success of other people, whether it's the success of his own peers, the success of his customers, beyond just his transactional services. When you immerse yourself in his journey, you will be able to relate to his world and certainly have a lot of learnings for your own journeys. Yet, I think his journey threw up many interesting questions, many interesting issues, including why people who are operationally and transactionally successful fail to build this larger strategic perspective. What does it take for them to make this shift from being very strong operationally to being more strategic and building a very holistic capabilities to look at a problem from a bigger perspective? To grow into a leadership role, you have to believe that you belong there. Many leaders struggle to build that kind of a belief. Presence is closely related to belief that you belong to the room. How can one cultivate such presence? How can one build trusted relationships with customers? How can one raise beyond transactions and become someone the customer is looking forward to? Reflect on these questions, given the fact that this particular leader's journey was in a Big Four environment, I reached out to many senior and very accomplished Big Four leaders. Shalini Pillay from KPMG, who has an extensive track record of working over 20-25 years across different roles in KPMG and other Big Four firms. Dan Powers, who's again, we've been a career accounting firm partner with global exposures, largely in the US, but also he has some stint in India. We will talk with ShashiKanth, founder and CEO of a 2% Club. He had earlier stints at Aditya Birla Group. He had earlier stints at Infosys. We also bring in very interesting perspectives from Sarika Nayak. Sarika Nayak is currently the Chief Marketing Officer for Indian business, Capgemini. She had earlier stints with Dell. She had earlier stints with Wipro. And she has a very rich experience of engaging with customers, grooming leaders. This episode and the later episodes is all about building one's brand and presence. We reflect with the various leaders on their experiences of building brand and presence. In this episode, we'll largely focus on what is that shift one has to make from being operationally successful to being a CXO. Who is eligible? Who is ready to make that shift? And what does it kind of things that one can nurture to build that kind of a shift? In the coming episodes, we'll discuss about individual experiences of building that strong brand and presence, how institutional support also has been provided. And in the last episode in this series, we will focus on specifically around women, their experiences of building their brand and presence, their challenges of building their brand and presence. So this episode, we begin reflections with Shalini and Dan getting their perspectives of what does it take one to move from this operational level to a CXO level. What are the expectations? Who are the right people to cross this bridge? And in their case, it's mostly how does one go from being a director, a technical director, to being a partner. I begin first with my reflections with Shalini, followed by my reflections with Dan.
I'll step back and just talk about the Big Four environment and how leaders are groomed.
Correct.
People who join consulting organizations join at entry levels, and if all goes well, then they see the whole journey with an aspiration to make it to the partnership.
That's right.
Typically, they will come in and very early years, first few years, they'll figure out which service line and solution space they want to be in. And then they start getting groomed within that space, and they normally move up the ranks within that one area. Your first major milestone is typically promotion to a manager level, where you're actually moving from being an individual contributor to then managing a small team with you and being responsible for a few more people. As you move to senior manager, you are then managing teams as opposed to one team, you're managing multiple teams.
Yeah.
As you move further up from senior manager to director, then you may have a solution responsibility and a mini P&L responsibility of sorts.
Yeah.
So the responsibility profiles change, but it's typically within an area.
Yeah.
Now, if you also are, and you're familiar with this, as one goes from director to partnership, the responsibility or the view changes a bit further to say that as a partner within a partnership, you are expected to represent the wider partnership.
Exactly.
So if tomorrow I meet Srinivas Uppaluri somewhere and I'm having a conversation as a partner of the firm, I should be able to talk to you to represent that wider firm.
Exactly.
I am expected to be aware of stuff that goes beyond my service line.
Exactly.
And so suddenly what was a progression that was in a certain vertical moves into a broad spectrum. It branches off.
Yeah.
And it's quite a sudden transition.
Shalini really talks about that sudden widening of one's perspectives from being very narrow, focused on your skills, your areas. When you now have to move to partner level, you have to widen up those perspectives, look at it from a whole firm, look at it from a entire customer requirements, not limited to your narrow specific focus. Let's get Dan's perspectives around this shift.
I think we have a unique profession, right? Because when you look at the first word in our profession, it's public accounting, right? So the ability to connect with clients, with the marketplace, with people you don't know in a brief period of time to earn credibility is a skill set that I think is innate to the people who are successful in our profession. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the different career trajectories that people can have, the partner role is somebody who is much better at both the technical as well as, I guess, the more of the soft skills, the people, developing that rapport, leading teams. And by definition, there are probably less of those people than the vast majority of the profession. Mm-hmm. We have another track for somebody who may be much more technical, but may not necessarily have some of the other leadership attributes, or at least have not demonstrated some of those leadership attributes. They might over time, but again, they're valued because of their technical competency. And so those people become managing directors, which is our highest level of employee.
So if I think what you're really saying is a partner is somebody who has the ability to probably draw from different specialists within the organization, stitch a solution to the market, engage with the customer from that perspective. That is a process by which you develop the market. That's a process by which you ensure the organization is orchestrated to deliver. But somebody who's remained at a managing director level is perhaps somebody who can deliver on one or two of those specializations, not necessarily build that kind of a outside-in perspective. Is that something nice?
Yeah, I think you've articulated it pretty well. There may be other differences, but that is clearly one distinct difference that I think separates somebody who becomes a partner versus somebody who becomes a managing director.
So what limits such people? Some people break through this, some people don't break through this. Some people build this presence, some people don't build this brand and presence. Why is that?
I was always told that a partner can always see another partner in 5 minutes.
Wow.
And I think there's a certain ability to connect. Is it emotional intelligence? Is it just a higher level of people skills in being able to gauge your audience, to read the room, to ask good questions? You're putting yourself in the position of a potential client, right? And it's far less about me talking about me, right? Should be skillful at getting you to talk about yourself. And then I can tag certain opportunities that might be there or places that I can follow up as I'm building a rapport and building a connection. And that's hard to teach. We think that we can teach it. I think we can make people better because they're more aware, but there is a talent that there's an innateness to it, that just some people have it and they can connect. Part of it is developing that emotional intelligence, that situational awareness, right? Which is, let me get out of my silo and my knowledge and really understand what does this potential client need to be successful. And it also works internally too, right? Which is, okay, how can I help my colleague be even more successful? And if I help my colleague be more successful, I recognize that as an owner of the business, I share in that success. And it's the ability, I think, to disengage from the minutia and really strategically understand the bigger picture and what the opportunities might be.
Dan is talking about who makes the cut. And he's talking about the people who make the cut, who are looking at what value they bring to any relationship. Whether it's a relationship of a customer, they're looking at how do I orchestrate the right solutions and benefits to this customer? Or if it's an internal colleague or a peer, how do I ensure that my peer is more successful or my colleague is more successful? We are constantly looking at what I can bring to those people. These are very innate qualities for a person to move from that operational transactional view to playing that CXO level. I think this is a very insightful reflections from Dan. So let me now read out a section of the story of the leader I worked with who struggled to see this perspective. He always went to probably promote his work, his accomplishments with others, and learned it the hard way that others will only open up to him only when he's bringing certain specific value to them. The leader I worked with meeting one of his senior partners who sits in the same office as he does in Mumbai. He's arrived at his office and I'm going to narrate it from there. Suzanne led him to Mr. Kapoor's room. It was a large by Mumbai standards with sofas, a coffee table and a desk by the window. The window was entire north wall, giving a stunning view of the pale blue sky. Mr. Kapoor was on his cell phone with his back to the door. Dilip took the cue from Suzanne and waited with her at the door a full 3 minutes before the call was over. And Mr. Kapoor turned around. He looked puzzled at their presence. Mr. Dilip Mishra, said Suzanne. Dilip didn't miss the quick half scan Mr. Kapoor made before addressing him. What is this about? Suzanne jumped in before Dilip could respond. Mr. Dilip's here from the Business Advisory Division to give you an update. And you wanted to have this meeting in the Trident. Oh yes, I remember. Mr. Kapoor smiled. How are you, Dilip? Shall we leave? Dilip was nervous. Yes, Mr. Kapoor, he managed. Pressing his palms on the table, Mr. Kapoor pulled himself up and grabbed his jacket from the stand. He walked in a rolling gait towards Dilip and gave him a surprisingly light handshake. Been in the office the whole day, I prefer an outdoor meeting. Let's sit by the poolside. Suzanne will have made the reservation. He said, turning to Suzanne. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Suzanne nodded. They walked to the elevator. Dilip followed Kapoor a nervous step behind. His mind raced. How should he begin the conversation? He had prepared thoroughly, the preparation covering his business practice, his customers, and related data swirled in his mind. He wanted to ensure a smooth start. After the lift doors closed softly, Mr. Kapoor turned to him. How long have you been in Mumbai office? 2.5 years, sir. I know we have met each other in update meetings, but you took 2.5 years to come and meet me? He shook his head slightly. The worst starting to the meeting. Dilip was now very uncomfortable. He tried to answer the non-question as they stepped out of the lift. To his relief, Mr. Kapoor's phone rang. Dilip's mind raced as they crossed the road on foot. In the hotel, Mr. Kapoor made straight for the poolside restaurant. He was still on the phone. Mr. Kapoor finished his call just as they reached the restaurant. I like the ambience. You get a beautiful sunset, he smiled. He was particular about getting a table with a good sea view. After they sat down, he came directly to the point. What's the revenue size you're delivering? 40 crores, Dilip said little cautiously, and I booked 50 crores, that's in hand. Mr. Kapoor beckoned the waiter. What's the tax revenue potential in your portfolio? There is a tax presence in some of my relationships. I'm not on the top of the billing figures though. Dilip kept his tone neutral, keeping anxiety out. Mr. Kapoor interrupted the flow. I like an Ethiopian coffee, medium roast, and multigrain grilled chicken sandwich, he said to the waiter before turning back to Dilip. I know our billings. I'm more interested in your view of our future potential. Place your order and we can continue our discussions. Dilip ordered a cappuccino. It gave him the briefest of pauses and he decided to set the record straight. I must apologize for not meeting you in person earlier. I wasn't sure if I could do that. Unless we meet, we'll never know the opportunities, said Kapoor, shaking his head. You represent the entire organization and not just your focus area with the customer. You're on the ground. Who other than you can give me insights about the potential? I understand, Mr. Kapoor. Kapoor took a bite of his sandwich. This is really good. I'm being very careful about my food, eating only high fiber and whole grains. Unless we meet, who will tell you of the opportunities you can find in my clients? He said, switching smoothly from food to business. The organization loses so many good openings because of this siloed existence. I completely agree with that, said Dilip. From now on, I'll ensure we interact frequently. We're getting good traction globally on the operational efficiency project. Each country is getting an average saving of 5 million USD. Mr. Kapoor looked towards the sea. Let's go and see the sunset, he said, walking towards the west side railing. Dilip wasn't sure if he had made any progress with him. Their meeting came to an end after the sunset without him sharing any more data. So this is kind of a meeting where he's gone talking about himself, and it's a good learning to him that he has to prepare, think from the other shoes. And I think even Mr. Kapoor, in his talk, although he's been quite rude to him, quite indifferent to what he's stating, was making the point that we have to ensure that you are on the ground, you have to ensure what is the opportunities for everybody in the office. And actually, when you do these opportunities, it's not only for everybody in the office, but you're also ensuring the customer gets all the services he needs. Now, who is eligible to make this transition? Shashi gives fascinating insights about what is mental toughness and emotional intelligence. How are you really prepared? So this is one test people have to go through before they're eligible to take the path of CXOs. In an organization like Aditya Birla Group or currently where you're working, how does one build that brand presence that is acceptable? So you yourself have grown from different levels to be acceptable at a board level. What are the transitions you need to make? What are the kind of things you have to work on? What are the limitations, if any, you have to fight? Or anybody else you groomed? What is that shaping? Because this is the real, because you have to belong to that room when you're going. Absolutely. So one is at an operational level, suddenly you're now moving into a level which is a very different way. They look at the problems. What is that learning, changes, thinking you had to do to get that level?
I think the first and the most important thing that comes to my mind is the Johari window discussion with the candidate or the person. It's important to understand what somebody doesn't know of himself or herself. And that's the starting point of a lot of growth ahead. First is, of course, assessing the capability of the guy to think or have the mental bandwidth and the emotional bandwidth to grow. And once you know that the person is almost there and he needs to be nurtured, then starting with this Johari window exercise.
You said mental bandwidth and an emotional bandwidth. So how do you distinguish for somebody what is that mental bandwidth and emotional bandwidth to be at that level?
Right.
Different from best of the operational level. I wanted to probably understand from you what is those mental bandwidth and emotional bandwidth. Of course, the hand holding is different part, but how do you distinguish that?
Got it. Mental bandwidth is the ability to manage multiple things at the same time. As a regional head, I used to get 400 emails per day. I used to many times tell myself that for me to be ahead of the curve, I need to work when everybody's sleeping. And I used to work in the night. I was struggling to cope up, but I was figuring out a way to cope up and get ahead of the curve. Right. So the question is, does the person have the mental bandwidth to deal with a variety of issues? So that's what defines a mental bandwidth in my definition of mental bandwidth. Emotional bandwidth is the ability to calmly and patiently deal with those issues. For example, when I was the CHRO, there was one big issue that happened in Hyderabad. There was one 22-year-old workman who actually collapsed and died of heart attack. And there were a lot of people from the local panchayat who came and created a and they did not let us remove the dead body from the office for 3 days.
Wow.
And we flew down from Bombay, me and my compliance guy, and managed the whole situation. We went to his home somewhere in the outskirts of Hyderabad, late in the night at around 10:30, 11 o'clock, and managed the whole situation and got rid of all the stuff. So, does one have the patience to deal with difficult scenarios? Does one have the patience and emotional quotient to manage different types of people? Now, these are the two things. As you grow, assuming that the functional knowledge is there, yes. If someone has to grow and do well, in my view, these are the two important things that will help somebody grow and be accepted.
Very fascinating insights about what are the basic qualifications. Being functionally very strong is not adequate. Operationally strong is not adequate. The mental strength and the emotional strength is very critical, as per Shashi, for even to start being on the journey of moving from an operational successful guy to being a CXO level. Dan brings a very different perspective that your credibility has to be first fixed. Your credibility has to be first established for you to be considered. So these are again a gating criteria. Do you have a strong credibility? Are you dependable? Is a perspective Dan brings up.
When you're first beginning in our profession, the ability to be technically competent, right, to bring excellence to the work that you do is critically important to gain validation, right? And you want people to think, because people who work in a profession tend to be smarter than the average bear, you too want to be able to demonstrate that. And there are a couple different ways that people can do that, right? One can be their own advertisement, right? Their own marketing person, their own PR person, and they do it through words. Far less effective in the long term. Much more effective is actually the work product, right? The work will speak for itself, and let the work that you do speak for you. There was a situation where somebody was very good at articulating, and you gained a great deal of confidence in talking to them that they were very competent, but the work product was just not reflective of that same expectation. The work product was inferior. And I took the person aside and I said, okay, part of personal branding, right? Part of who you are is when someone hears your name or speaks your name, what do you want them to focus on? What do you want that name to stand for? If you want it to stand for mediocrity, then somebody who goes through the motions, who is very reactive to doing what they're told, to being very tactile versus strategic, again, that will drive certain behaviors. But if you want people to sit there and say, Dan Powers stands for excellence, right? He's outstanding. You're going to have to work harder to do that. But you've got to be focused that when something leaves your desk, it's as good as you can make it. And I always love that. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I love to share the Henry Kissinger story, where Henry Kissinger comes in and he asks one of his staff to write a position paper on something. And so the person writes it up. And Kissinger leaves it on his desk. Kissinger calls him in and says, "Is this the best you can do?" And the individual says, "No, Secretary Kissinger, I can do better. Please let me have another try." So he works on it again, leaves it on Kissinger's desk. Kissinger calls him back in once again and says, "It's the best you can do." And he goes, No, I can do even better. So let me, give me one more try. So he continues to work on it, comes in, works on it all night. Kissinger says once again, lays it down on his desk, "Is this the best you can do?" And finally he says, "Yes, Secretary Kissinger, this is the best I can do." And Kissinger says, "Good, I'll read it now."
Wow.
But we should always have that mindset of is this the best that I can do? And because that work product becomes mine, right? And even if I'm further along in my career and I'm reviewing it, it's still the same component, right? Either I didn't spend the time reviewing something or I reviewed it and I didn't catch it. But either way, it's an error. But when it leaves my desk, it's mine. It's not the person who was working on it. It's mine. And so having that mindset of always trying to do your best, putting your best foot forward, and not settling for good enough unless you absolutely, because of maybe the time or other factors, but to do the best you can in the circumstances that you have, I think that to me is the key of personal brand.
Now we're again reflecting with Shalini of how does one build that wider perspective? What does it take for somebody who's so transactionally good? When does one start building that wider perspectives? How does Shalini see this? What is her experience of grooming people around this?
See, at the core, Srini and I have this conversation with a lot of partners who struggle to go, like I said, from that narrow to the wider thing. And my simple question to them is, if I'm having a conversation and I say, okay, what are your proudest accomplishments over the last year? Normally, they will talk of a project. They will talk of a win. They will talk of a client.
Correct.
And then when I go to that conversation to say, okay, so this is your client and this client is in this industry. By the way, are you aware of what's plaguing this industry now? Do you know what the challenge that this industry is going to see in 2 years from now? And more often than not, the answer is they will not have thought through that.
Correct.
So my point to them is, if you pride yourself, if your biggest pride for the last year is this client, shouldn't you make it your business to understand their business thoroughly inside out? Let's start with that. How can you go there, do this ERP implementation, get kudos for being the best partner and say that I don't really know what is that CEO's biggest pain point?
Absolutely.
You should, as a partner, view that as a failure. If you've gone in, done your bit, come back, but you don't understand his industry, and that's the client you're proudest about, then as an advisor, you've not been a true advisor. You've not understood them. So that's one way of broadening the horizon in your limited. You're working on a client on an industry, but you're not taking the trouble to research that client or industry better.
Correct.
Assuming you do that well, the next question to this person would be, okay, you know your clients extremely well. How well do you understand the firm you're working for?
Correct. And what did you take with them? Yeah.
You are waking up every day to come into this organization, just like you would study a client's organization. Have you studied your own organization? Do you understand which are our biggest strategic levers of growth, our pillars of what's going to drive us into the future? And if you don't, then you're doing injustice to yourself, because you're coming into this organization every morning, you're working here 8, 10, 12 hours, but you're not invested in understanding the organization. If you don't do that, you are not aligning yourself to those areas of growth. And you're not, forget the organization, you're not being fair to yourself, actually. You're not doing justice to your role.
Basically, you're externalizing your purpose, not internalizing. So
Correct.
Externalizing the purpose, saying, I will work on shaping this change in the industry. Just if you go away from a professional services environment where the organizations have a different kind of a structures, the management growths are very different. How can people learn from this kind of an outside-in look, this wider perspectives looks? Because there also a lot of people work operationally long. They could be in any function, there could be any role, but when they start playing the senior leadership role, where they have to look at it more strategically, they don't have the bigger view. And how does one cultivate in those organizations this kind of a change?
I tell you, I interview candidates who come to me from industry. Okay, so they'll come to me from spending 15 years, 20 years in the IT industry. If I'm evaluating this person as a partner, what am I looking for? I'm looking for that broader market understanding.
Absolutely.
And quite often it is not quite there, because they have worked in a certain domain area and that's all that they do for a living. But I feel that if you have reached 15 years in an organization doing a certain kind of work, at that leadership level, you need to reflect on why are you even looking for a change? Because you've probably hit a roadblock. You're seeing that your career is not going anywhere. So even within industry, depending on your functional area, the same principles apply. If you don't have a broader view of the organization, and by the way, when I've met people sometimes and I ask them, what's the size of your organization globally? You'll be surprised, but they don't have the number on the top of their head. For a leader who spent 20 years in an industry, if you can't rattle off the size and the P multiple and the market cap of your organization globally and in India, it speaks something for your awareness.
Absolutely.
I was chatting with one of my husband's cousins who was working for one of the ed tech companies. Very excited about what this person, of course, young in the career. But I was saying to this person that while you're working within this company, take the time to understand what your organization does. Do you, when you pick the Economic Times every morning, first of all, do you pick it? Or whatever is your source of news? Do you track how your organization is doing? And I said, no. I said, shouldn't you be reading up about it? In fact, shouldn't you go 2 steps ahead to say, who are my top 3 competitors, and shouldn't you be tracking them? Secondly, it's ed tech. Are you tracking the technology that's going to disrupt your industry? If you're not, because this person came to me to say, what should I do to evolve and grow? I said, these are minimum 3 things, and start tracking your leaders. Be a little more aware of who's leading this organization. So I'm saying for a junior person also, there is an opportunity to broaden your horizon.
Absolutely.
So at the minimum, if you don't do this, you'll never get visibility.
Sarika Nayak highlights how important right from induction time, where you probably get yourself identified to a very narrow unit or a very narrow account, you have to cultivate this ability to look at the wider organization. Here are my reflections with her.
In my view, I think the first thing, Shini, is whenever we do our inductions also, and I think often a cardinal mistake we make is by saying, hey, you have joined this and this unit, or you've joined this and this project. Actually, that's not what you've joined. You've joined the organization and that brand. So for example, for Capgemini, when the person is joining, they're joining the Capgemini brand. In that there is a business unit, in that there is an account, in that you're supposed to deliver is fine. Often I think sometimes we try and identify too closely with only that BU or only that account, and which is why our vision becomes myopic. So I would start from the induction itself, saying that organizations, and especially the younger folk, when they come in, they want to belong. So, they must first get the view of what the brand stands for. And that it is one, and in our case, we always emphasize that it is one Capgemini. Doesn't matter, you could be any part. So it starts at the induction. Second, I think a lot of communication, we overemphasize the belongingness to that unit. It's important to know where you fit, especially for technical people. And it's not really a surprise many times when we ask them, what is your revenue of the organization? They wouldn't know. So I think marketeers need to own some of that piece where we are communicating important information which is relevant as they grow through their journey.
Just going back, I think it relates to me. I think what you're saying from an inside out, when I am at a customer, maybe I'm from one particular division of the business, delivering, sharing, doing some work, I should be open to opportunities for the rest of my business. That means I should know what my rest of the business offers to this customer. That means I need to therefore network. So one of the problems I find, and I think maybe also as a woman also I want to understand, is people networking within the organization among their own people. So people can be extreme, saying only if I'm called for a meeting, I'll go. But they never network. So if I network with, like in this journey of this gentleman, I talk about how he has to network. And when he networks, he has to think from the shoes of that people. They're not interested in what you're doing. They're interested in bringing to their table. You relate to them. And I think that deliberate networking is what I introduced in this guy's journey, in the real journey as well, to really start empathizing with other people so that they empathize with him and they work together.
Srini, the larger the organization, the more silos get formed, and hence the need for informal networking is even more stronger. And the more global you get, while people say global, we are still all connected, it's far from true. The thing that you can achieve in a face-to-face meeting can never be achieved with 20 virtual meetings. It's just human nature, right? The event that I had gone for recently is a company-wide leadership event, and we usually hold it every 2 years. This time it happened after a longer period because of COVID. And the reason we invest in it, and it is an expense to get people from across the globe in a common place, is to align everybody on the key messages from the group. Second is to ensure that we have a lot of time for networking. Actually, another thing we Indians, and I'll flog myself also on it, we often create agendas which are so packed that there is so many sessions, there's no time just to stuff food and that's it in the evening. The program that I was talking about was a 3-day program where 50% of the time was spent on meeting people, ideally whom you don't work with. There was randomization in the way we were allocated to restaurants. There was randomization in the activities we chose to do so that you meet different people. And I was amazed, Srini. I've been here 6 years and India plays a very significant role in the group's structure. So I would assume that I know a lot of people. I was stunned. I came back at least with a whole list of almost about 20-25 people whom I really connected. And it's not just a hi, hello, get your name. What do you do? How does it impact? That kind of a thing. So I would say programs like these should not be undermined. They are investments because once the leadership connects, then things become so much more easier. I'm sure you know this other piece, which is I've seen it in a few other programs where they do a speed networking. You are paired against people whom you don't know. You have a clear 7-minute kind of an introduction where it's enough for you to know what the person does, but it leaves enough room for you to come back and pick up the threads if it's of interest. I'm back from that program. This morning, I had people who are from US who wanted our support from India. So I'm just saying it works. It works like a charm.
I think I like this idea. I think so organizations must have some things like this beyond individuals trying to have proactively doing their own networking.
Correct. And of course, informal networking often depends on the individual. I'm saying the organization should create a structure. After that, it's left to the individual, right?
Brilliant insights on networking, brilliant insights of learning from each other, brilliant insights of collaborating, working together, seeing together as a team. So to summarize this podcast, we talked about what it takes us to move from being operationally successful to build that wide perspectives of representing the organization, wide perspectives at looking at holistic problems of the customers, who is eligible, who is ready to make that shift. Talked about how important one builds this ability to worry about the success of the customers, success of the peers. We reflected about how one should have strong mental abilities as well as emotional abilities to be ready to make this journey. We also reflected about how one has to have a wider perspectives beyond the transactions, beyond their own project, and wider understanding of their own organization to represent it from a wider perspective. We also talked about the power of networking. In the coming episode, we'll talk about the presence, building a strong presence, the journeys of some of these leaders, of how they made this shift, and how organizational support will go a long way in making you cross this barrier of being operationally successful to being a CXO.